this Rashi, I must have learned it, but I didn't think about it. He says the word safuf is you're standing and it's as if your feet are now on the ground, like sofeh, something which floats is sofeh, and you're literally in that situation. You're floating. You can't move, and you think about the tragedy and just the pain and this. It's mind-boggling, but I think feeling the tsar for others and resisting the temptation of this is either listen, the gormim relevantium have to look and say, how do we practically look in this? But it's this one's fault and that one's fault and this we'll blame and this one warned about it and this one said, and I think it's a mistake to go there. I don't think it's for us to go to those places. I don't think that's helpful to others or helpful to us. We should hear positive news and good news.
Amen.
I wanted to focus this week as we're approaching the Chag of Shavuot to some writings of the Rambam about Torah and about the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. I wanted to give handouts. I think I'll be able to bring it up on the screen if somebody wants to pull out a book in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah in Sefer Mada in Hilchot Talmud Torah, chapter 3, Perek Gimel. I'm going to begin reading from there, and the Rambam speaks about the Keter Torah and what the Keter Torah means and what it should mean to everyone. It's important to emphasize that it's for everyone. We and again, without getting political or anything, or if valuing the Medina and the valuing the even learning, which is whether it's Torah Derech Torah Mada, should in no way diminish our enthusiasm and realization of the primacy of Torah as both a way of life and as something which is important to learn, and that's for all for everyone and for all Jews, hopefully. So the Rambam talks here about the Keter Torah, and I'm going to pull it up. Let me see if I could share a screen. The host has disabled participant sharing screen.
I'll do it. 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Go ahead. Share.
Okay, great. Okay. This is, you can see the screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, Moshe, can you just repeat? You're talking about Mada, Hilchot Ma, Talmud Torah.
Hilchot Talmud Torah, Perek Gimel.
Okay.
Hilchot Talmud, Hilchot Talmud Torah, Perek Gimel. I'm going to read from the beginning. I'm not going to read it all, but this is what I want to start with. Halacha Aleph. The Rambam says, B'shlosha ktarim nichteru Yisrael. The Jewish people were given 3 special crowns. Keter Torah, the crown of Torah. Keter Kahuna, the crown of priesthood. The Keter Malchut, the crown of royalty. Keter Kahuna, Zachabo Aharon. Aharon was given it. Shenemar v'haita lo ulzaro achara brit kahunat olam. Interesting, that's a pasuk talking to Pinchas, not to Aaron himself, but that is the Keter of, he was the progeny of Aaron. That's the Brit Kahunat Olam. Keter Malchut, the crown of royalty, Zachabo David. It was given ultimately to David. Shenamar, we discussed this last week, a few weeks ago. Zaro la'olam yihiyeh v'kis'o kashemesh negdi. That we pray for in the Shmon Esrei 3 times a day. Es Tzemach David Mehirat Hatzmiach. that the crown of royalty, according to Nachmanides, the Ramban, the Chashmonaim, the Kohanim, the Chashmonaim, the Maccabees, they actually erred and did something wrong they were given the Keter Kahuna. They were from the family of Kohanim Gedolim. B'nei Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Chashmonai, from Chashmonaim. And according to the Ramban, one of the things that they did wrong, the mistake that they made, is that they had no business appointing themselves, making themselves kings, according to the Ramban. And therefore, that's given specifically to Malchut Beit David, Zarola Olam Yevi Kiso Kashamesh Negdi. The third, Keter Torah, the crown of Torah, Harehu Munach ve'omed umuchan lakol. It's there, standing, ready for everyone. Shene'emar Morasha Kihilat Yaakov. It's a Morasha Kihilat Yaakov. It's a Morasha which we inherit and we pass on, not a Yerusha, a Morasha, something to be a treasure which we get and pass on, which we are like caretakers of as part of a chain of Mesorah. Kol mi sheyirtze, again, interesting is the word Morasha, Kihilat Yaakov, and not Yerusha. Kol mi sheyirtze, anyone who wants, Yavo v'yitol. Shenemar, Shema Tomar. Maybe you will say, She'otam ha'ketarim gidolim miketer ha'torah, that those are greater. After all, we generally view exclusivity as a sign of something on a higher level. If it's exclusive, if only certain people are allowed into the club, it's more exclusive, it's more special, it's more holy. Hareyu Omer, the pasuk initially says no. Bi melachim yimlochu v'roznim yechokeku tzedek, bi sarim yashuru. From this pasuk, Kalamadata sheketer haTorah, that even the melachim and roznim, it will be in me, in my Torah, that the keter haTorah gadol mi keter kehuna, the keter malchut. That the Keter Torah is greater than the others. Now, if we stop for a moment and reflect on this, it's such a beautiful idea that's ingrained into who we are, to our Mesorah, to our way of thinking, that it's open to everyone, the Torah. You know, there are the priests and there are the kings, and they're important that we have those things. And there is a Keter Kahuna and there is a Keter Melucha. But there's a Keter Torah, and the Keter Torah, the ability to learn Torah, to embody Torah, to be a Gadol B'Torah, to be someone who takes Torah and both for themselves and transmits, and to be Chachmei Mesorah, people, that's open to everyone. And whereas the other two, if you know this, both the king and the Kohen are anointed, that the shemen, which is symbolic, which is a real thing that they did, but if you think about your anointing, where you're saying, here, it's you are given this God-given birthright, so to speak, of kahuna or melucha. You can't, the old jokes, I'm not going to waste your time because you know the old jokes. You can't buy into the kahuna. You're in or you're in. Well, you can't say, I want to be part of the kahuna and I'm ready to pay. You are born into it. But Torah just is just, which is open to everyone, to every, without regard to social standing, to class, to who you were born to, what family. Whereas the other two, there's no anointing for Torah. The Rosh Hashiva was not anointed. The Rav was not anointed. The idea of Torah is that it's patuach lakol, and the Keter Torah is beyond and above the other Ketarim. So it's a beautiful and in a way, in our times when everything is supposed to be, there's a certain equality that Torah is is open to everyone. There's a certain beauty in that it's not the priests who are, and now there are checks and balances, and there are different, even in the setup of the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohen Gadol is, like the Lahavdil, you think about the three branches of American government, the executive and the legislative and the judicial branch. We have the priestly branch in the Beit HaMikdash. We have the king. And then we have, within the Beit HaMikdash itself, was the Lishkat HaGazit, was a room in a very prominent place, the Lishkat HaGazit, with the Sanhedrin, where the Sanhedrin, the deciders of Torah and transmitters of the Masorah would sit. So there was, of course, an interactivity between these different branches, and when the Kohen would go when the Melech, before he'd go to war, how he'd go to the Kohen Gadol and the Urim V'Tumim, and he'd consult with the Sanhedrin. So the interplay of the different there was an interplay, but here it's talking about the keter, the crown, and the individual levels of all of these people, of the different groups, that Keter Torah was above the other Ketarim, to a point where in Halacha Beis he says, Amru Chachamim, Mamzer Talmid Chacham, a Mamzer who is on the social class, and again, through no fault of the child who was born a Mamzer, it's a separate discussion. But someone born out of a relationship which was a chayve misa, it's a machlokas in Gemara, which relationships produce a mamzer and which relationships don't produce a mamzer. Just chayve lavin, just a lav, something which is prohibited merely without the punishment of death, the product of that union, it does not create a mamzer. The product of a union, which is chayve misa, does produce a mamzer. I have no fault to the mamzer, but at any rate, what it's telling you, what this is, this Mishnah, the Mishnah which says this in Horiot, I believe, which says mamzer talmid chacham, someone who comes from the lowest social standing, but who is a talmid chacham, kodem lekohen gadol amaretz. It comes first, meaning you're mechabed him before you're mechabed the high priest, who is an am haaretz. Shenema yekarahi mipninim. It is more dear to me. It is more dear than pninim. Pninim are generally like pearls, but here yekarahi mikohen gadol shenechnas lifnai v'lifnim. The pninim is referring to the pninim. Is referring to the Kohen Gadol who enters, as we read in the parsha a couple of weeks ago, who enters into the Kodesh HaKadashim, Lefnai v'Lefnim, once a year. So the Torah is more dear than Pninim. So this is Torah, and it is so dear. And he goes on Halacha Gimel, and now we're going to see almost a paradox, and it's a beautiful paradox, I think, but almost. It's one of the few, when it comes to Torah, there are a few paradoxes. One is, Ein lecha mitzvah b'chol hamitzvot, I'm reading Halacha Gimel, Kulan shehi shkula keneged Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah keneged kulam, we know the Mishnah. Talmud Torah keneged kula. Elma Talmud Torah keneged kol hamitzvot. Now listen to this. Why is Talmud Torah keneged kol hamitzvot? Talmud mevi Lidei ma'aseh. Lefichach haTalmud kodem leMa'aseh b'chol makom. So what's greater, Talmud or Ma'aseh? So here's what it said. Talmud is greater because it brings you to Ma'aseh. So I'll ask again. What's greater, Talmud or Ma'aseh? And it's I think a beautiful paradox. The Gemara has a discussion. Actually, Rav Shimba Yochai, right, is one of the discussors of this issue of Talmud and Maaseh. What's more important, Limud or Maaseh, Talmud or Maaseh? And the conclusion of the Gemara is is as the Rambam brings down here. Talmud is greater. Shemiviyah lidei ma'aseh. So it's like, who's more important, the husband and the wife? It's a big machlokas. So you say, okay, the psak is that the husband's more important because he does what the wife tells him to do. So that's exactly what it's saying here, that the Talmud is more chashuv, shemiviyah lidei ma'aseh. But the idea is I think a beautiful and a deeper idea. It's a recognition on the one hand that how we live, how we act is supreme. We're a religion, and we should be a religion, which is, of course, it's built on ideas and a philosophy and beliefs. These were less emphasized, a lot of the people, and again, people would say, oh, we got it from the Arab, we got it from the Greek philosophers. I don't want to necessarily go there, except to say certainly the formulation, well, the Rambam formulates a lot of the beliefs and the philosophy. It's clearly, taken the languages and things from some of the Greek philosophers. The question did we have no belief system? Did Moshe Rabbeinu have no belief system? I don't think so. But I think he did. But I think there's clearly an emphasis not on what we believe. And whereas in contrast to, and again, I'm not here to put people or religions down, but a religion which is based upon, if you believe and accept this and accept him as your savior, then you're in the club. And that's really all you need. We're very far from that. Meaning we're a religion of action. Yet there's the understanding that to have meaningful action, to have sustainable action, to have a sustainable way of living our lives, if it's not based upon and built upon Talmud, learning, understanding, wisdom, then it's going to be hard to sustain. It's going to be hard to keep. It's going to be hard to be really meaningful. So it sounds like a paradox. What's greater, action or learning? And the conclusion is learning is greater. Why? Because it brings you to action. So it sounds like the rabbis are having fun with us, but really there's a real depth there. That there's an acknowledgement of the two sides of the coin, both which are paramount and which, more importantly, I think, can't exist without the other. That or can't be sustainable or meaningful without the other. And that's why the Rambam says here, there's nothing, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Yet Talmud Torah, why? Because shemeviyah lidei ma'aseh. So that's what the Rambam says here in Halacha Gimel. And then he goes on, and along the same lines, in Halacha Daled, he says, Hayu lefanav asiyat mitzvah v'talmud Torah. So again, you'd think Torah is paramount. Torah is the most important thing. But if you have in front of you learning Torah and a mitzvah, im efshar lemitzvah lehayasot al yedei acherim, if there is someone else who can do this particular mitzvah, now this is not talking about a mitzvah, which is a mitzvah shadagufo, where I can't tell someone else, you put on tefillin for me, but a mitzvah, some other, a good deed which needs to be done by someone, lo yafsik talmudo, then the learning is paramount. V'im lav, but if not, yaseh ha-mitzvah, v'yachzor l'torato, that you stop your learning and you go to do the mitzvah. So Talmud Torah is so important, but Talmud Torah lama mipnei shemevi lidei ma'aseh. So on that hand, you have that there's a ma'aseh mitzvah to do. So you got to stop your learning. You close your Gemara, and you don't say, I can't do this. I can't help your mom. I can't help your dad. If there's a brother who's watching TV and a brother who's sitting and learning, and they're both from guys, and they're both good guys. So they should understand that you close the TV and help mom and dad, and let me continue learning. But if there's only one brother, or they're both learning, then they're gonna close the Gemara and do the Kibbut Avayim. That's clear, and that's the important aspect of Talmud Torah.
What if he's sitting and learning and there's a levaya to go to? Other people can go to the levaya.
That's a
I mean,
good question.
most 10 out of 10 people would close. Well, I can't speak for people who are, I can speak for myself, but maybe because I'm a woman, I don't know.
I think that, and this is the discussions about this, the more people at a levaya, the more kavod hames it is. So certainly if it's someone who is a righteous person, someone who is a Talmud Chacham, someone who is where it will make a difference if the Avel or Avelim see that you're at the levaya, or see that it's heartwarming for people to see, wow, so many people came out to pay respect for my parent. So in those situations, I think it's pretty clear that one should, also close the Gemara and participate in that. There are times where, and it's a discussion. I don't know offhand, what the exact halachot, but I think in those situations, certainly, it's clear that one should is that the more people at the levaya, I won't say the more the merrier, but you get the idea that it's better to go and to be part of that. I think it's listen, people use and justify either this way or that way, and I don't want to, especially in the I want to avoid getting into political or thing, when do you stop learning? And this sort of leads also to the issue of, and we'll see the Rambam himself talks about it, to what the person says, I'm learning, leave me alone. I'm doing the most important thing. Clearly, we don't say that. We don't say that all the time. Clearly, also, and this is one of the, we talk about the tensions. We spoke last week about tension between hitlahavut and zehirut. It's that tension which exists in our religion, and dealing with that tension, and it's a positive tension. When on one hand, we recognize our responsibility to the tzibur, our responsibility to act, to do mitzvos, and at the other hand, no less do we appreciate the primacy and the importance to learn Torah, and not just learn Torah as a subject, but to have Torah as kihem chayenu va'orech yameinu. And that's the challenge, because it's easy to be on one extreme and the other. If the other say, the people are this and they're that, or only this, but to really truly see the value of both sides creates sometimes a question. Well, what do I really do? Do I, I remember, and we probably all remember times, or I remember learning in Kollel as a young married guy in New York, and at that time they had in Washington, they had the large rallies in Washington now it wasn't for Soviet Jewry at that time. That was before. It was for,
I think it was.
Was it? I mean, maybe some of you remember. I think it was after the years. I guess this was in the mid 80s, late 80s. They had the big rallies in Washington.
Might have been against giving weapons to Saudi Arabia.
Okay, the AWACS, maybe.
Yeah.
people were going, and busloads of people were going, and the debate in the kollel, I remember, and the guys was, we're sitting here learning, and should we, get on the buses and travel for 4.5 hours from New York to the to the capital, and 4.5 hours back, and do it? Is it pikuach nefesh? Should we be doing it? Is it efshar la'asos al yedei acherim? People have to sincerely look at those questions with the value of both, a friend of mine who was a very sharp fellow, very, very sharp fellow at the time, commented, and it was a small kollel we learned that it's called Navardik Kollel in Brooklyn on 49th Street in Brooklyn. That's where after I got married, we moved to New York, and I learned for a number of years in this Navardik Kollel, and it was interesting and good experience and good learning. But I remember this fellow who said during this whole discussion, he sort of on the side said to me, he said, in the kollel that we learned, it was a room which it was a small kollel, 15 guys, whatever, 20 guys learning in the Beis Medrash. And there was, in those days, there were no cell phones. We had there was a payphone right outside the door in the entranceway of the Beis Medrash. There was a payphone. So the payphone rang. When the phone rang, so it was somebody's wife calling, probably. Either that, I don't know if it was telemarketers or what, but it was somebody calling. So, you're learning, the phone rings and you're learning, or if you're out, you ain't come back from the bathroom, it's an easy this, you go, you pick up the phone, Shlomi, your wife's on the phone, or something like this. So, but oftentimes, and there would be people in the kollel, the phone could ring and ring and ring, and they wouldn't get up. Now it's somebody's wife calling, somebody should, I don't know if there should be people should take turns or whatever it is. So this fellow turned to me and quipped. He said, here people are debating whether to take 4.5 hours this way, 4.5 hours this way to go to do a mitzvah. Yeah, people here who won't even if they're passing by and the phone is ringing, they won't pick up the phone and answer it and say, somebody, your wife is calling. So, and they're debating whether to go and do this or that. He says something's wrong here. Something's missing. There's something which is lacking, the sensitivity which is lacking. It's important to have the sensitivity on one hand of the tremendous chashivas of Torah, and on the other hand, the idea that Torah is supposed to bring us lidei maaseh. The story I did reminds me of the famous story of Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha. Rav Aaron, he would pass by when the payphone rang and he was on his way up into the Beis Medrash and the Gush. He would answer the phone. The Rosh Yeshiva would answer the phone. And one time the story is told, so it was a phone call from somebody's girlfriend. It wasn't somebody's wife. A guy learning in yeshiva. His wife was learning. His girlfriend was learning in Michlala or Machon Gold or whatever it might have been in those days. And he said, can you tell him not to call me? And he said, okay, I'll tell him. And she didn't realize who she was talking. And she wanted to make sure that he gave the message. She says, who am I talking to? Who is this? And he said, it's Aaron. He said, it's Aaron, and she made sure, okay, Aaron, you make sure to tell him to call, whoever she was. So he said, why am I different than everybody else? I'm the Rosh Yeshiva, but the phone is ringing. It's a call for somebody. The obligation is to answer the phone and to give over the message. This is the tension. I think that we have. I want to go on and read a little bit more in the Rambam. Tchilat dino shel adam, the beginning of a person, when a person is called to judgment, ein no nidon ela ala Talmud. A person, when he gets up to Shemayim, is asked they're asked a number of questions. The Gemara says, but they're asked, did you learn kavata itim la Torah? The achar kach al shar ma'asav, and then other things also. Again, with the recognition that is something which can impact and influence the other things. It's important always to be osek in Torah. Afilu shelo lishma, shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. And this I think we've talked about in the past, the idea of Torah lishma, what Torah lishma is, and the importance to learn, even if it is shelo lishma. The beauty of what Torah can do for us, at least I believe, is only really if we learn it lishma. And lishma, when it comes to Torah, means to understand what is God saying to me. What is the Dvar Hashem? Not what do I want to read into it. Certainly not, because that I want to get a good grade on the test. I want to be considered the best guy in yeshiva. I want to get into a good shir. Those things are all Torah, which are good Torah, but it's Torah shelo lishma. Torah lishma is really to understand what is the word, to leave all my preconceived notions at the door of the Beit Midrash, and to open up the book, the Chumash, the Ramban, the Gemara, the Mishnah, and say, what is God saying to me? And that is what Torah Lishma is. And if we open ourselves and we're receptive in that way, then Torah, God willing, can have that wonderful effect upon us. Now he talks in Halacha Vav about the single-mindedness. Misha nisa'o libo l'kaya mitzvah zu kara'uila. Somebody who really wants to take this on, to v'liyot mukhtar b'kitra shel Torah, and to be crowned with the keter of Torah. So on one hand, it's open for anybody. On the one hand, it's not you're anointed and you're in the club. On the other hand, it creates, if you really want, everybody has the mitzvah of learning Torah, but the Rambam seems to be saying here that we could have the mitzvah of Torah, and then we can really try to be crowned with the crown of Torah. Somebody wants that. Lo yasiach da'ato l'dvarim acherim. He shouldn't let his mind wander to other things. V'lo yasim al libo sheiknet Torah im osher ve'akavod ke'echad. And he shouldn't. It requires a single-mindedness, and it can't be. Well, you know what? I want to be. Now it's popular. For shidduchim, right? Yeah, I'm sure you guys have heard this. My daughter's looking for a learner earner, right? Yeah, an earner learner. Come on, you heard that expression. That's an expression. You want an earner learner. So he says, it's not bad. An earner learner is not bad. But if you want to be mukhtar b'keter Torah, it won't necessarily go a good guy to go to Olam Haba and learn Torah, and you could be a very, very good things. I'm not saying you can't also earn a living. On the contrary, the Rambam says even somebody who's single-minded about it, it shouldn't be living off the public dole to do it. Now we're going to get to that Rambam. I don't want to jump the gun. He says lo yasim ali bo sheyiknet Torah, but he's saying, again, this is the tension that the Rambam's bringing. On one hand, he's going to say soon that a person should work. That on the other hand, he says a person has to be, like mishugala davar. A person has to be, shouldn't say, okay, I want this and that, and live comfortably. Kach hi darko shel Torah. This is the way of the Torah. This is the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. Pat b'melech tocha. Even if it comes to, and here's the way I would explain the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot, even if pat b'melech tocha, it doesn't mean you can't eat good food. But it means even if you're eating bread and salt, vala aretz tishan, and you don't have the most comfortable Sealy Posturepedic mattress, and you sleep on I happen to like these Israeli mattresses, these foam mattresses. The chayei tzar tichya, and even if it's a life with his chayei tzar, ubatorah ata amel, and batorah ata amel, and still, even you with those things, with that life, a person still toils in Torah. As this week's parsha, Parshat Bahar B'chukotai, which we're going to read, what's in the Chukokai Tishmeru V'Asisam Otam, that Shetiyu, Rashi brings down Shetiyu Amelim Batorah, that there is a concept of Amelus Batorah, that a person should toil, that it's work, and we know all the stories of the people who became who invested in and put in work and hours to understand and to learn and understand. It's an intellectual exercise, the Rambam says. It's a hard intellectual exercise, which takes toil. And yet, v'lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. Again, from Pirkei Avot. One doesn't have to finish everything and learn everything. However, v'lo ata ben chorin libater. Aval im hirbita Torah, hirbita schar. V'aschar lefi hatzar, and as we say, lefum tza'ara agra. Person that puts in effort and toils in Torah, the schar of limud Torah is there. It doesn't say that the Havana of Torah is guaranteed. There are people who can understand better with less work. It doesn't mean that just by putting in effort you become a Talmud Chacham. You have to have kishronot, and you can the schar, yes, and a Havana, yes, and every person's chelek in Torah. That every person has a chelek in Torah, no matter their intellectual necessarily kishronot or capabilities, yes. But he's not saying these are the people will, somebody, it will, but by putting in the hours, you are now crowned the Talmud Chacham. He doesn't say that. Says the Rambam, Shema Tomar, maybe you will say, here's what I'll do. Let me first make the money. I'm gonna spend the next 10 years working hard, making a lot of money, so that I can then learn. And then the efneme asakai ve'echzor ve'ekra. Maybe a person will say that. I'll go and I'll put in the years. I'm going to retire. I'll learn. I'll join a retirement kollel. If you think this way, it's not going to work. Person could have a plan to say, yes, after I retire, I'll have more time to learn. But if a person, the Rambam here is talking about a person who wants to put it off and say, no, I'll do it later. Ella asay Torat HaKeva. A person needs to make Torat HaKeva. It doesn't say Keva means Keva. It has to be 18 hours a day or 15 hours a day. It has to have a kviyut. It has to be something which a person keeps to. Umalachtecha arai. And the malacha you do, and malachtecha arai. The al tomar l'chisha efne eshne. Don't say, when I am free, I will learn. Shema lo tipana, the language from the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. Maybe you will never have that time to really, really get free. And on the same thing, the Rambam goes on. Katuv batara lo b'shamayim hi, v'lo me'ever layam hi, lo b'shamayim hi, lo b'gasei haruach. It doesn't go to people who are arrogant. V'lo me'ever layam hi. It doesn't go to people who are looking to make a lot of money in dealings. Leficha chamru chachamim lo kol hamar b'schora machkim. V'tzivu chachamim havei mema'ed ba'esek va'asok b'torah. Do what you got to do. Do what you got to do for business, and be osek b'torah. Now, I don't want to. We certainly, the times are always different. And, there's certain requirements necessary. A person can say there were maybe days, times, and the Rambam will talk about it, where a person could say, okay, work 2 hours a day and you'll have enough money to feed your family, and the rest of the time, learn. For most people, it's not realistic and practical in this world. You say, it used to be a person would do this. They'll go and they do the X amount of work. They do it as much as they have to, and then they close up the shop, and then they learn the rest of the time. Certain things and an ability to be able to make a parnasah and being able to earn a living requires schooling, requires training, requires certain business and work norms, which a person has to live in. And the Rambam, clearly was aware of that. At the same time, he's giving parameters. And in the way he says, it doesn't go to the arrogant, it doesn't go to those people who are focused. And that's what I would say. Are you focused on the parnasa? Are you focused of living a Torah life and learning Torah? Divrei Torah nimshalu, he says in Halacha Tet, nimshalu kemayim, like water. Shenemar hoy, kol tzamei lechul hamayim. And finally, Torah goes to those who are humble. Just like water flows to the lower point. Lo melacha mahamayim ein mitkansim b'makom midron. The water it only gathers in a place where the flow is down. Ela nizchalim me'elav u'mitkamtzim b'makom ashperon. They don't, in the place where it's up, where it's still high, between, the water doesn't gather there. Kach divrei Torah ein nimtza'im b'gasei haruach. V'lo b'leiv kol gvar leiv, and not in the heart of those who are arrogant. Interesting that the word leiv in our Masorah, we take leiv as feeling, but also leiv, it says lo b'leiv kol gvar leiv. Leiv is seen as the seat of wisdom. Kol chacham leiv, we're going to read. We read in Vayikra, the building of a Mishkan, that the leiv is viewed as the seat of wisdom. Ela b'daka v'shafar ruach, shemitadek ba'afar raglei hachachamim u'meisir ta'avot v'ta'anugei hazman melibo. Torah flows and goes to those people who humble themselves. Now, on one hand, this is not just a segula. They say, "Oh, if you're humble, God will give you Torah." The true way to learn, if somebody really wants to grow in learning, they have to have the humility to listen, to hear another point of view, to admit when they're wrong, to admit when they don't know something, to listen to people and say, "Oh, this is a person I can learn from." The arrogant, by their very nature, if we're arrogant, so yeah, I know it, yeah, I got it, I know it, I don't need to know everything. I don't need to hear from somebody else. I have it. It's not just a segula that God gives the Torah to those who are humble. That could be too, that God helps those who are humble. But as a very practical matter, and there are so many connections going. What's one of the first things we teach our children when the kids come home Shavuos time? The Har Sinai. Why was Har Sinai picked? This mountain said on this mountain said that. What a beautiful lesson for our children, for kids, for little children just starting out. That it's on a little Har Sinai. It's on the Har Sinai that said, "I'm nothing special. I'm not the tallest mountain. I'm not the greenest mountain. I'm not the this mountain. I'm not the that mountain." If a person has that, then a person's receptive. If we go back to what Torah Lishma is, to receptive, to hearing, to letting Torah impact us. So both in terms of being to learn from other people, as well as the ability to let Torah impact us, the Dvar Hashem impact and really touch us, requires the humility. Now, if a person has that humility, then Torah can enter into their fiber and allow them to become, God willing, who they can be, and to Torah to have the effect that God willing that Torah is supposed to have on all of us.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, you're in the middle of a sentence.
No, go ahead.
I have a comment and a question, if I may. The comment is, my husband, Zichrono Livracha, used to always explain the bracha lasok b'divrei Torah, that we should treat Torah as an asek, as a business. Pay as much attention to learning Torah as people give to the money coming in and the money going out. It's like day and night and afternoon and sleep, middle of the night. That was one comment. The other thing is, I think that the Rambam is not talking to women here. But this is not for today's class because I think our time is over. But I mean, if we as women have it's really a question. If we as women have a choice between doing a mitzvah for the community, for a neighbor, for another person, or sitting and learning Torah, even if our inclination and our interest is sitting and learning Torah, perhaps if it's not a piece of Torah that's speaking to women or dealing with women's issues, perhaps the woman is really, it's clear that she should go do the mitzvah for the person.
I think you bring up an important topic, and I think maybe it's something, even though the Rambam in this parak doesn't really discuss per se the women's obligation, what the women's obligations are in terms of
It's a huge topic,
yeah, which is a huge topic. So I want to do it justice. Maybe what I do. There are things which I want to finish in this parak and also get into, because in the end of the parak, the Rambam brings up interesting issues of parnasa and making money from Torah, or
Right.
which I want to get into. But I think I'm going to, and I want to do it. It's not just a cop out, but it's a little bit of a cop out to not discuss it right now.
No, my class is over.
But I will also next week, maybe at least to give the parameters and talk somewhat about, I guess, another week before Shavuot. So I had planned on talking about, this, continuing on the theme of the Rambam and Talmud Torah, but also to touch on the obligation of women and the connection of women to Torah, and how it might impact the question which you're asking, for sure.
Can you also
Rabbi Stavsky, can you also discuss maybe the Yisachar Zvulun concept?